Hello and welcome. I'm Jason White and this is Jason's Weird Reads, and today I'm going to be trying to convince you to read a new author. Well, he's not new. He's written 14 books, but he's new to me and he might be new to you. And of course, I'm talking about Robbie Dorman. Now, I talked to Robbie recently and I'm going to put his interview up there in the cards so that you can go check him out. And I highly recommend his book. I mean, I've never done a video like this, why I think you should read this author. And why am I doing this? Because, I went onto YouTube to see if I could find any Robbie Dorman interviews, and there's like nothing, and there wasn't very much in the way of book reviews either. I would like to see Robbie Dorman spoken about a lot more. Now, as I said, out of his 14 books, I've read 3 of them, and I want to talk about I want to tell you what those books are first. The first one I read was Conquest. The second one I read was Dead End, which both those books, Conquest is his first written book, Dead End is his most recent written book. Well, Conquest is his first release book. I don't think, if I remember correctly from the interview, he wrote some trunk novels before. And most recently, I read War on Halloween. And all 3 of these books are great. Dead End is bound to make my top 10 list, and it made my number 2 in my revised favorite horror list, which you can check up there if you want to check it out. So, why do I think you should read Robbie Dorman? And I think there's a few reasons why here, and so let me get into them. Reason number 1: he writes honestly. He wears his passions on his sleeve. Now, I was listening to a podcast recently where Tananarive Due and her husband Steve Barnes were interviewing Stephen Graham Jones. Now, you're like, what does Stephen Graham Jones have to do with Robbie Dorman? Well, he doesn't actually, but he did say something. He said something that was very quotable. He defined what an artist is. He said, Stephen Graham Jones said, "An artist is someone who walks around with their heart exposed and they rub it everywhere they go." And I was like blown away by that quote. That's like wow, you know, like what an awesome quote. But Robbie Dorman's work does that. You can, just by reading his books, you can tell what Robbie Dorman cares about. He walks around with his heart exposed and he's rubbing it everywhere for you to read. Point number 2: his books are fun. Every one of these books, even though they have like a fairly important message attached to them, they're complete fun to read. The first book, Conquest, that I read is about werewolves, a biker gang full of werewolves. That right there is fun. But there's also this small town with some serious political issues, and you have the werewolf biker gang has their own political issues, and then you have both these sides clashing, and there's a forest fire that's approaching. Now, this book is like less than 200 pages long, and it surprises me how much detail he was able to squash into this into this short-sized book, because the characters were rememberable, or that I could remember who they were. The plot was pretty thick. His plot points were just crazy, and it all fits. It makes perfect sense. There's no fat. It's a great fucking book. Second book that I read is Dead End. This book just blew me away because it's about a guy who works at a factory, and how the people who own factories, it's not a factory, it's a wall. I took it as a factory because where I come from, but it's basically an Amazon mailing place where they send stuff out. They take orders in and they put them in bins, and then they send them off to shipping. But it's almost exactly like factory work. In a sense, it is factory work. But the message being that employers at factories and these types of warehouses treat their employees awfully unless there's like something like a union in place. And I experienced what that was like more than once in my life, but most recently. I've explained that enough. I don't want to get into it too much. The third book I should get into first is about a young family who recently went through something very hard. The mother died, so they move, and And also the father lost his job. He was a cop and he got into some trouble, not any bad trouble. He was calling out other cops for doing bad things. And so they moved to this new town where it's very Christian and they're against Halloween. And so there's this very evil preacher who this family sort of goes to war with, in a sense. And there's like something very evil and nasty going on with this with this preacher. He pretty much controls the town. Now, those are some pretty heavy topics and sometimes even political topics, but you read them and they're still fun. Like, you have a blast reading them. Next up, I have these books are short. Like, I think the longest one I read was the Halloween one, and I think it was like 230 pages. So they go by quickly, though. You read them, and you start reading it, and the chapters are fairly short, and so you go through like 10 chapters, and you're like 30% ahead somehow, and you're like, how'd that happen? And those are my favorite types of books to read, honestly. I touched upon this next point. The characters in his books are very real. There's some authors that I've praised a lot on here, but sometimes they have flaws, and one of them is Tim Curran. I was just talking about Tim Curran in the comments, or the darkness, in one of my videos recently, and they said, they named what they found to be a flaw in Tim Curran's work, and I went on to say what my flaw, I think, is in that Tim Curran tends to write the same characters over and over again. No matter the story, there's like the same people with different names. But Robbie Dorman, his characters are all very different from each other, and so he's able to build what feels like real people. Joe from Dead End feels very real. He's got like some anger issues, and he hates the idea of working for these large corporations who do evil, and his ex-girlfriend is very real. She's nice enough to let him sleep on her couch, but she's also very strict at him keeping a job so he can move the hell out. I could go on with the characters. There's a lot of really interesting things that go on with the characters, including my next point. He can write romance that tugged on my heartstrings. Now, I'm talking in this one, in the book, The War on Halloween, there is a girl-on-girl romance that was just utterly sweet in a good way, not in that make you feel sick or give you cavities type of way. It was subtle and yet very sweet, and it tugged at my heartstrings. And there's a couple of queer relationships and conquest. I think Dead End was the only one that didn't really have any queer relationships that I'm aware of, but he makes them believable by taking out the weird stereotypes you would think a guy who isn't gay would write about, and make it unbelievable. At least that's the way I took it as being a straight person myself. You might be in the LGBTQ area and read his work and say, no, that's not right. But I found that it was very believable. It's just two people falling in love, and I think that's what it comes down to. My next point is sort of maybe along the same lines as, a white guy writing, a white straight guy, may I add, writing LGBTQ. Well, how about a white guy writing female characters? We all know that can be very controversial, but I think Robbie Dorman handles it very well. There's no clothing rubbing against the women's nipples. They're not fascinated by their own bodies. They don't even mention their own bodies. They just feel like real people. They might be a little bit more effeminate than the men, but that's fairly normal, right? But they all have characteristics that aren't stereotypical, in my opinion. His book typically have great meanings, which goes with his passions, I think. One thing I like is the meanings behind his book are easy to decipher. But one reason why I enjoy reading period is I like trying to find out what the meaning is behind it, if there is one. I don't think there's anything wrong. There's some people who argue against this, that books don't need to have a meaning, and of course they don't. But I think every book has a meaning somewhere in there, whether the author intended it to be there or not. And I don't think there's anything wrong whatsoever with somebody like me going through trying to find some meaning. I think it's just human to do that. We do that with almost everything. We try to justify our own existence in a way, and we do that. One way we do that is by watching television shows and reading. We try to find ourselves and our own identity within books. And we also like to learn about the identity of other people. Okay, the next point here is his books are simply good. They remind me a lot of books published by big publishing houses like Pocket Books, Del Rey, Tor, etc., which isn't to take away from self-published authors, because he is a self-published author, but he reminds me, and this goes into my final point, he reminds me a lot of, I guess I'll expand a little bit on that last point. His books have like that big publishing house feel to them. And this leads into my last point. If you're looking for a comparison, if I were to compare Robbie Dorman's in his own category, but I would like to say, to anyone who hasn't read him, think 1980s Robert R. McCammon, those old horror books he wrote, like Night Boat and They Thirst and Stinger. Think of John Saul, like Creature. Think of Dean Koontz from the 80s, like TikTok, that Dragon Tears book, which I used to love. Winter Moon was awesome. And also I would add in a lot of Bentley Little in the mix, like Bentley Little's entire catalog. If you mixed all those into one cauldron of literature, you could say, literature soup, you would have Robbie Dorman. And if that isn't enough to convince you to go check out Robbie Dorman's books, then I don't know what else to do. Down there in the comments, in the notes, I'm going to have a link to his Amazon author profile, so definitely go check him out. Go get some of his Kindle books, or get the physical books. I don't have any physical books yet because this is a mess. I need to get rid of some before I can add some, but I definitely want to get some of his physical books because he's like a favorite author of mine now, and I'm looking forward to reading much more of him. And like I said before, I'd like to see everyone talking about Robbie Dorman just at least a little bit more. Alright, thank you for watching. Now, keep being creative and keep being safe, and I'll catch you guys in the next bookish video.